to all new members of the audience who are not just right now joining us. My name is René Spitz. I'm part of the board of the IF Design Foundation, an educational foundation that is committed to scientific research and education in the context of design. I would like to introduce you to Annette Diefenthaler. She's also a member of the board of IF Design Foundation, and we will both guide you through this event today. Then I would like to introduce Angelika Nollert, the director of Die Neue Sammlung. She's the generous host. She's our generous host for our joint project here at the X-Depot. We believe that design needs to evolve, which was a clear finding of a study we conducted from 2016 to 2021. Designers and design educators from around the globe agreed that design education does not properly prepare the graduates for their futures, and that it needs to undergo radical change. And these findings were published in the book Designing Design Education, which is available for free download on our website. It has run out of print after only a few months. But this book was just the starting point. And in order to catalyze active change, we started a collaboration with our gracious host, the Neue Sammlung, 3 years ago. And the plan was, over the course of 3 years, ending this year, we are conducting a series of workshops. And each workshop convenes a learning community of about 30 to 40 design educators, and a select number of impulse speakers then shares inspiration, and the educators then workshop ideas how to integrate these ideas into their teaching. And today is the conclusion of the sixth, the final workshop. The topics of these workshops are inspired by what we heard during that global research project for the Designing Design Education book. Interestingly, many design educators were not exactly so concerned with how to better teach graphic design, what software might be most relevant. Rather, they were curious about topics that typically do not show up in design education at all. How do we inspire students to learn? How do you teach courage or trust? What do we know about how people best learn in the first place? As a result, the first workshop focused on topics of teaching and learning sciences, such as experiential learning, growth mindset, new ways to measure learning. The second workshop focused on personal growth, resilience, emotional intelligence. The third workshop focused on artificial intelligence and how to integrate that into design studies program. The fourth focused on value-based leadership for sustainability, and the fifth on innovation.
Yeah, this sixth and final one focused on a topic where we actually get to the core of what design is all about, creativity. It's an interesting term, and we heard from Anna yesterday, actually a lot of folks who are in design kind of like to avoid it, right? Sort of like creativity, that's kind of an odd term, can seem like a bit of an empty phrase at times. It certainly is not. As we experienced yesterday, we had 5 fabulous speakers who filled the term with meaning and who let us experience and embody what that means, creativity, and very excited to share that with everyone and actually also repeat it for those of you who've been part of the last 2 days. So thank you for being here. The community of educators who was here over the last couple of days engaged in activities to then also think about how to take what they have learned back into the classrooms. As René said, that's really at the core of what we do here, right? Building a learning community that then brings that idea of what the future of design education could look like to the students on the ground, right? That's really how change happens in systems. So with that in mind, we're excited to invite you on a journey that recaps what we heard yesterday. And what we will start with is the impulse of Sascha Friesike. Professor Dr. Sascha Friesike is a professor in Berlin. He cannot be here with us today, so I'm going to do my best to recap what he took us, the journey that he took us on. You can see him here. And in very good teacher fashion, he actually facilitated a conversation for us, because this room is full of people who actually identify as creatives, right, and who know a lot about creativity. So rather than telling us some theory, he constructed that with us together, and we built our understanding together. We did that with flip charts. So I'll show you a few of the topics that we talked about. We started with this idea of why does it even matter? Right? Why bother about creativity? And essentially there's three areas that came out, and I have to say that Sascha very elegantly wove in his findings from years and years of research. So he always made sure to kind of validate that that's also what showed up in his own research and literature. So three areas that showed up here, and why does this matter, is there is an area around creativity is needed to solve problems. Right? Kind of like it's a practical thing, and we need that to create solutions. There is a very current aspect of creativity these days because there's more complexity in the world. We need to find those solutions for actually increasingly complex so-called wicked problems. So there's something about that. And then there was another thing that showed up early in the conversation, which is play. And creativity is often actually fun, playful. It's something that we enjoy doing. So with that as a starting point, something that the standard definition of research in research says about creativity in a very simplified way is actually creativity is two things. It's something new, novel, hasn't been here before, and it's something that's useful. And the interesting thing about useful is actually in the eyes of the beholder, meaning that you get to define what useful is. Anna is going to talk a little bit more about this in a moment, what that means and how important it is to really think about that judgment. Who gets to say what's useful, and how does that possibly impact our definition of it? But this is something that you can hold, right? We'll come back to this. New, useful. That's what creativity is all about. Sascha also introduced actually 100 years old, almost 100 years old, a definition of the creative process. An interesting thing is that term creativity really only started showing up after World War II. This is prior to that. So at that time, we didn't really call it the creative process. I think this was the art of thought, right? That's what that was called. But if you look back at it, that definition of the creative process is something that really still applies. It's been called many other things today, but this idea that there's a phase of preparation, incubation, then there's illumination. I think we also often call that ideation or something like that today. Then evaluation of the ideas and elaboration. We often refer to that as implementation today. That still holds. So not entirely new invention, been around for quite a while. And we then reflected on, well, what is creativity for us, right? How do we know that? What is showing up? And there were a lot of things around like imagination. It's unexpected. It's a human gift. Joy, curiosity came up again. But also it is a tool, and the challenges are here again, right? Interesting discussion also about what creativity is not, right? Sometimes it's really clearly recognizable that something is not creative, and how do we recognize that? You will see that a lot of these terms actually kept repeating, and you will hear them again as we go through our day-to-day. And then I think this is the last part. Yeah, this was then going a little further in an introspective way of thinking about this. Like, when are you creative? And this started with, interestingly, John, where are you, John? Somewhere here. John said, there you are. started with community, which actually is often not what people say first. Sascha said it, especially in his work, in his classes, people often talk about themselves individually, right? Their own individual creativity, not necessarily creativity as a communal thing, but I think many of us can relate to how creative you can feel in community with others. The one place that comes up the most, when are you creative, is the shower. It is the last place in our society where we do not have our phones. Even though Sascha was saying that some people now stream their podcasts into the shower, so there's that. But really that kind of being free from distraction, right, also is something that might resonate with some of you as absence of distraction. We discussed a little bit about the level of stress, maybe not a total absence of stress, but not a pressure stress that is necessary to get into a creative state. Walking, movement, we will end with a version of that with Maarten today, was also something that was considered really important. And then again, this conversation about the challenge, right? Something about like there needs to be a reason for creativity. And then lastly, we talked about our creative process, right? You remember that kind of overall we took at it, and interestingly, a lot of what came up first was around like opposite of focus, getting things out, serendipity, which cannot really be translated into German. I'm not quite that comfortable with serendipity in German, but you know, it's the absence of process. Actually, I brought up that my process is actually quite structured, which led us to a conversation about the fact that the creative process is something that's very individual, right? So while we might often organize creative processes as group activities, ways how we are creative very much depend on who we are and how we best create a creative moment, a creative way of being for ourselves, which then led to an interesting conversation about what that means in our teaching. That means that we need to create different ways for people to discover how they can be creative, and setting the conditions for allowing for that kind of pluralistic approach to it. So this was our background, and with that, I would love to invite two members from our learning community to come up. I'll ask you to just super briefly introduce yourselves so that we know who you are, and share with us what stuck with you and what are you wanting to do with us in the future.
Hello, everybody. First, I would like to introduce you to my wonderful amusement park team of creativity. So we have wonderful Sonja. She will guide us through this presentation, sort of. We have Gregor, who will sort of make the conclusion and has the formula for creativity for us, which is quite amazing. But then we also have, obviously, Gabriel, who will give us a little dance lesson, sort of, because you need always a little bit entertainment, otherwise this learning is difficult. And then, in the end, we also have Yoram, extra, came from Israel, and he's giving us some music, so it's much easier to digest all this information.
So start with the music.
And I'm Peter.
So as we learn in this workshop, music can open our minds. So we prepared a guitar tune that I will play on my air guitar.
Thank you so much, Yoram. It was striking to us that Sascha managed to sandwich theoretical information with a lot of fun anecdotes yesterday. Some of those stuck with us a lot, like the fact that we are most creative in the shower when we can't access our phones, or the fact that he talked to a researcher who told him that he discovered that you can only improve to a certain point, and up until then, you improve, and at some point, you only differentiate your result. Then also, we talked a lot about the fact that digitization and optimization really are reasons to think more about complexity and what it ultimately means for us to be creative. As Annette already guided us through, we talked in our little group a bit longer about what creativity really needs for ourselves individually, but also for students in classrooms. We re-evaluated that creativity is many things for many people individually. So it can be a form of combination of original thought, it can be inspiration, it can be expression of emotion, it can be problem solving, and it can only be also be playfulness and music and fun. And then we discussed a little bit further the tools for creativity that we discovered in ourselves, in our daily practice, but also in classrooms. And we decided to put down a few things that helped us, like the absence of distraction in a classroom, but also a concrete challenge or like a hook that can help us go into an assignment. We talked about serendipity a bit longer and what it means to have this happy coincidence in our daily work, or like a random, relevant moment that you encounter a person that you meet, that you talk to. It can be a mixture of both limitations and a really comfortable place that helps us get into this creative zone and be more creative and be more productive too. It helps to have a very comfortable and open space that leaves room for improvisation, but it also leaves room for messiness and maybe that spark that happens when you get into this messiness. We were talking about the magic chamber, the Wunderkammer, that sort of has an importance of opening up space quite literally, that maybe has large windows, that lets in light, that lets in plants, that has high ceilings, or even like fun things to do while you're at work. While we think it's important to rely on what we already know and pull ideas out of our own self, we also think that music, cookies, fun, encounters with friends can help solve creative problems more easily. And also, while creativity needs constraints, it's really dependent on what the quality of these constraints is. What are these constraints and what are these limitations, and how do we balance them, and how do we keep them so delicate that we are able to create in a free way. To get you on with the playground, I'll move over to Gregor.
Yeah, we did not talk a lot. We also managed to condense everything said into a magic manual for the super creative student. And as the creative process is so diverse and the preconditions for creativity are so diverse, students have to fill it out themselves and put their own do's and don'ts inside. But the most important thing is to observe when this moment of serendipity struck them. So Peter designed some wonderful stickers for our students with which they can indicate the moment when the conditions were perfect for creativity. Put the sticker on the page and say, this makes me creative. And also on the last page, the most important reminder, it's about fun, having fun. That's it.
I'm excited to now introduce you to Anna Abram. Anna is the leading expert on neuroscience and creativity. With educational and professional training in the disciplines of psychology and neuroscience, she has worked across a diverse range of academic departments and institutions the world over, all of which have informed her cross-cultural and multidisciplinary focus. Today, she is the E. Paul Torrance Professor and Director of Torrance Center for Creativity at the University of Georgia in the USA. Anna investigates the psychological and neurophysical mechanisms underlying creativity and other aspects of the human imagination, including reality-fiction distinction, mental time travel, including the social and self-referential cognition, aesthetic experience, and mental state reasoning. And as the author of many leading publications on the topic, including the Neuroscience of Creativity and the Cambridge Handbook of Imagination. Anna, one of the sentences that really stuck with me from your talk yesterday was, we are flipping the No.
I just thought it, René. We have an error in our script. What you were wanting to say, and I have it here in my book, was that the thing that really stuck with us is that neuroplasticity, which our pedestrian understanding is essentially the ability of the brain to learn, right? Sort of. So neuroplasticity is facilitated in part through the undertaking of creative activities, which feels really interesting, that creativity is actually really necessary for our brain to continue to work. So very excited to hear more about that.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you all for being here. It's wonderful to talk to you about what my research on our brains and the psychology of human beings has revealed about creativity, why it's important, and why it matters. So the first thing I want to show you, sorry the slides aren't looking great, but is that creativity is really a brain-resistant capacity of the human mind. Yeah? We know this from looking at people with certain types of brain injury, either caused through trauma or stroke and so on. And as we've seen that it's very difficult to break creativity. So if you look at case studies of artists who've gone through different types of neurological disorders, it's very rare to find cases where they don't continue to be creative in some capacity. Their styles might change, their mediums might change, their level of productivity might change. They might be slightly less productive, but they're still productive. Yeah? This is astonishing because it's very easy to break other functions, language, motor function, and so on. It speaks to the deep-seated nature of creativity and how it develops in our brains, in our bodies, in our minds. We see it apparent from the first time a child can express itself in some way, when it explores its environment, reaches out, plays, and so on. That's where it starts, and that's why it's encoded so deeply in our brains. Okay? I want us to think about why this is. Why can't you break creativity? So I'm just going to give you an example of why creativity is a little bit different from other types of complex cognition that we do. So imagine how your mind works when you're trying to read a poem from a book, or you're trying to recite a poem from memory, compared to trying to create a poem from scratch. And if I ask you to do it today, you have some approach that you start with, and what you end with will be a little bit different from what you do tomorrow, or a week from now, and so on. And the reason why you do it differently each time, compared to reading a poem or trying to recite something from memory, is because of the plurality of the brain, the multiple realizability of the brain. Decades of neuroscientific research has shown us that there is no single brain region, no single brain network, and no single neural activity pattern that is exclusively in place for creativity. And that's a positive thing. Yeah? What's there is that we just have our minds, our capacities, our bodies, and in situations where we're asked to be creative, it's the context that forces us to do something new. Yeah? And so we use the brain that we have, which has evolved for all sorts of functions. We know a lot about the many, many, many brain networks that are in place. Networks are essentially specialized areas that work together in tandem for specific functions. And we know that of many networks now that are in place for specific functions. Yeah? And all these networks have in common is that they're built for a purpose. They're there to receive, and they're there to respond, yeah? And make sense of the world. So they receive information, they make sense so that we're better at recognizing, better at responding. So for those of you who were here yesterday, you should be readily able to recognize this, yeah? So yes, I've changed your minds forever. And for those of you who can't, perhaps you can try and see what you're seeing in this picture. It's hard to tell because it's a degraded image. When I show you a photograph, you should see a cute little frog staring right at you. Now if I show you the degraded picture again, you should be able to recognize the frog, and your brains have been changed too, because at any other time you see this picture, you will be able to see the frog. And that's because that's the way the brain works. Receptive predictive cycles. Take in information, make sense of it, store it for later use, to come up with the most plausible, most accurate explanation possible. So these predictive receptive loops are used all the time. Imagine the last time you were driving a car. For those of you who do drive, there are moments where you have to be really focused at an intersection. When someone brakes in front of you or runs across the road, you have your executive function network on hand, really focusing, really making sure you do planned action. Other times when you're driving, you really don't know how you got to some space because your mind wandered. Even such a really complex task like driving becomes fully automatized in many, many ways so that your mind is free to go somewhere else, yeah? Internal mentation. So this is kind of how the networks work. When it's needed in a way, it responds as appropriate. So it's a beautiful brain that we have that essentially is there, all these networks are there, follow the path of least resistance. They're there for a function, they're there to do a function as coherently, as accurately, as effectively as possible. The problem, of course, in the case of creativity is that these same mechanisms have to be used for another kind of loop, a generative, explorative loop, okay? So what happens there is that you have to actually overcome this path of least resistance. You have to break away from it. And what we do, essentially, when we're trying to be creative, is that we throw all our capacities at it. They all involved in a very dynamic way with one another, each of the networks that we have. There's a lot of evidence for all of these 4 networks to be involved in creativity, but we know that there are plenty more. Yeah? The attentional networks, the motor networks, all of them are also part of this. So, what I can say about the creative brain is that it involves about creativity and how it's instantiated in the brain is that it involves the multiple dynamic engagement of all of our brain systems that not only differ in the way it's dynamically engaged between us, like no two of us are doing it in exactly the same way, but also within you, okay? The way you use it today to do something creative will not be the same exact way as you'd use it tomorrow. And that's wonderful. That's the multiple realizability of the brain capacity there. That's why if one of these roads are blocked, you could use the other roads available. There are many roads to Rome. That's the first conclusion I want us all to be aware of. The second thing I want us all to be aware of is the doing. That seems to be the most important aspect of being creative, to do, which is why I picked those pictures to start the talk with. In each of these cases, we are doing, as designers, you know how much the act of engagement is important to your creative process. And there are many things that we've automated that are useful to automate because they take us away from wasting a lot of time on things that might be perhaps purely mechanical. I'm really glad we have washing machines and I don't need to wash all my clothes by hand anymore, right? But not all automation is equivalent. There's times in which it might be useful to outsource some mechanical aspects of it, but we perhaps have to pay attention to when we start to outsource the cognitive elements of our ideation process. We are in a phase now where a kind of de-evolution is being spoken of because we've entered a phase where a new kind of automation has entered our landscape, which is AI, which has essentially polarized the world in terms of how scared or excited we might feel about it. In the case of creativity, though, when I'm asked to speak about the influence of AI, very often what I see is that people tend to, let's say, confuse product and process. It might look like the thing is coming up with a poem that looks very similar to what a human might do, and you know, it could be. I mean, I think of artificial creativity as something very distinct and not something to see in the same way as human creativity, but very distinct and interesting on its own. But we have to be careful to not confuse process with product. So we, as a species, have a pretty analog kind of brain. We've evolved ways to do, to be, and that is what evolved our capacity for creativity. Any automated system has been designed for a very specific purpose. So we might come to the same outcome, here, boiling water, but you cannot compare a campfire-made water, campfire use of boiling water to a kettle. It's completely different, yeah? And the process is what matters for us. The doing is what matters for our brains. We know a lot about how pushing ourselves, skill development, is kind of autotelic, it's kind of self-rewarding if we do things that meet. We are in situations where the challenge meets our abilities, we evolve, we're very productive, and we keep enhancing who we are. If we stop using our skills, the question is how it affects not only our skill development, but our ability to engage in the most productive state of imagination and consciousness, which is the flow state. It involves doing, it doesn't come any other way. And if we don't use our brains, the old adage of neuroscience always holds, neuroplasticity is all about learning and doing. And if you don't use it, you will lose it. And we know this from decades of brain research. So that's the next thing that I want everyone to have on their radar. When we think about how to engage the creative brain, active engagement in creative practices, in abductive reasoning, is the key to really realizing your potential, our students' potential, and pushing that in a very intentional manner, and thinking about the kind of tools we use to automate, to think about what that very intentionally is really important. Because without them doing it, they cannot be a creative person. Yeah. The next thing I want to get into is this definition, which is the standard definition of creativity. Things are creative if they are considered to be novel or, let's say, useful. Other words can be used for it, all interchangeable. And this definition is applied across across types of magnitude, whether you're looking at mini C or big C creativity, lower levels of creativity, subjective levels of creativity that children show, all the way to, let's say, recognized, accepted, eminence, genius forms of creativity. But there are lots of problems with the standard definition of creativity that have been pointed out by artists, yeah? And let's take Siri Husband, who is a very good writer, and she engaged with a lot of neuroscientists, and she pointed out that for artists, this usefulness component doesn't make sense. I read out directly from what she says. I ask you whether Emily Dickinson's poems are useful. My novels, are they useful? And what use would they be? She calls this a corporate definition. Anthony Brandt, an acclaimed composer at Rice University, points to other problems with the definition, that this usefulness is very externally dependent. And so if it's dependent on other people's judgment, this is a very precarious thing because judgments can change, no two people may agree, and what the artist is doing is somehow separate from the judgment of the external person, and that needs to be there as well. So he essentially thought of things like value, utility, and so on as secondary attributes to novelty. And he also made clear that we need to distinguish the making from the reception, the process from the product, always when we think about creativity. I go back to when Husband was asked, how do you know that it's like, this might be a novel way, how do you know that it's creative? And she said, the only way an artist knows what's right and what's wrong is through a gut feeling. You look at the sentence and you say, that's it, yeah? So it starts from something within, and I've tried to pull this in my attempt at coming up with a new definition, which is to say, maybe we've latched onto the wrong end of that definition. Maybe we should be thinking about things that are novel or unexpected and satisfying, and that's perhaps where we should be starting with when we think about our creativity and those of our students, yeah? In fact, in the original standard definition, they point out the need to distinguish between the creative experience and the creative product, the internal frame of reference of the creator, the explorer, and the maker, compared to the external frame of reference of the audience, the teacher, the assessor, the field, yeah? They're not unrelated, but they are separable, and they're not substitutable for each other. So when we think about how many people agree that this is creative, we are making external we're adopting an external frame of reference. But when we're talking about whether a person is being creative, we have to try and tap into their internal frame of reference. In that case, a child is not that different from an expert, because if they're coming up with things that are novel and satisfying to them, they are experiencing creativity. Okay? So which brings me to so I would say that this is a third thing to keep in mind, which is that we have to think about where an idea begins and where it ends, and be really cognizant of the whole process involved there. And then we know how to perhaps, stimulate creativity better in our students and our colleagues and our teams. The last thing I want to point out, again, this internal perspective is things that I think that even the most eminent think about. So take the example of Bob Dylan, who won the Nobel Prize in Literature not so long ago, and he was asked to reflect on why a musician, or he wasn't asked to, in his speech, he reflected on why a musician was getting a literature prize. And most people would think it was about the words, the meaning making, and he actually went beyond that, because he said, well, it's really about connection, it's about feeling. It is about creating something that moves people, and that all writers do this. It's about using words to move the listener. And the moving starts with yourself. If you are not moved by what you have made, there is little chance that you are moving other people. The first estimation comes with the experiencing person. Yeah? I will read this out a little bit, the words of the wonderful Carl Rogers. Perhaps the most fundamental condition of creativity is that the source or locus of evaluative judgment is internal. The value of the product is for the creative person established not by the praise and criticism of others, but by himself. And I think all of us have been in situations where students come up to us and say, is this what you want? Which means they've not really recognized that they have an internal perspective that we value. And do we value it? If we don't, we should start to. So this starts by themselves. Have I created something that's satisfying to me? Does it express a part of me, my feeling, my thought, my pain, my ecstasy? This does not mean he's oblivious to or unwilling to be aware of the judgments of others, but that it's secondary. If to the person it has the feel of being me in action, of being an actualization of potentialities in himself, which heretofore have not existed, then it is creative, it's satisfying, it's emergent. And that's what we need to try and nurture, because our students live in a time where they are entrenched in external judgment. Yeah, we are very lucky being of the older generation, because we had moments to ourselves when we could come up with our own ideas, have thoughts that we could completely develop without having to think about what everybody else thought about it. And they are not like that. They're absolutely immersed in their social sphere. It has advantages, but it has a lot of disadvantages. They're very hard on themselves. They're very, very, let's say, fragile in many ways. And it takes a lot more to be confident, to be risk-taking in that context. Yeah? We know from a lot of work on distributed reasoning that talking to people like yourself, or only being in your echo chamber of people who are like-minded, is like having a conversation with one person. Talking to people who are very, very different from each other capitalizes not only individual potential, but makes creative collaboration, creative communities a lot more powerful, because you're using the individual potential of everyone, which is unique. Yeah? So the last thing I will stop with here is to think, when we evaluate our students, to think about what are we evaluating them based on our own yardstick of our expectations, based on how they're performing relative to their peers, or based on how they performed relative to themselves, to how their previous performance 2 weeks ago, let's say. All of these, I'm not saying that they're not all important, they all are, but I think we tend to look at, in a lopsided way. We tend to ignore them in terms of their own trajectory. So I would say embrace the I, encourage our students to embrace the I as the last learning objective that I will push through, because that's the seat of it. They have to develop, that's where you start with the confidence, your ability to get a sense of, this is really new, what I'm experiencing, this is satisfying, this will perhaps resonate with a wider collective. And it has to come from within, because that's what creativity is, about our individual potential. With that, I come to the end of this impulse. I thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much for this inspiring talk. And I would like to invite 2 members of our learning community to join me up here. Yes, thank you. Team Scotland, yes. And we are curious to hear. Now we are curious to hear what stuck with you after learning about Anna Abrams' work yesterday, and what ideas did this spark for your takeaway?
Thank you. Everyone can hear me? Please tune in your ears for a Scottish accent. This is your warning and your preparation. Thank you. Our team here, I'm Chris, Marcus, yes. We have Susie, Susanna, and Hye-Jung. And we want to give to you maybe 3 takeaways from the wonderful presentation we had from Anna yesterday. The really difficult thing about this is that Anna's presentations offer so much and so many perspectives. We had a nightmare of a time trying to pick out the things that we all loved and that we all found interesting in common. So we'll do our best, but we want to start with some plagiarism, if you don't mind. Yesterday, we had a wonderful exercise, which we have shamelessly stolen from yesterday's presentation. That exercise was quite simply to think about and reflect on what you see in this image. And this exercise stuck with all of us quite profoundly. Maybe I'd like to ask someone who's new here today to tell me what they see on the page. You must not give me an awkward silence. A dot? We have a black dot. What else is on the page? Space? Yeah. And someone from yesterday, give me some of their interpretations. A window? A black hole? A tunnel? Okay. Instantly, we have different interpretations of what's on the screen. Annie's.
Nicely made graphic, I see today.
What a circle, by the way. What a circle. Oh, no. Yeah, freehand. We wanted to use this as a framing device for the 3 points that stuck with us the most. What you just did when Anna asked us yesterday and when I asked today to tell us what you see here, it's not because you have some talent, it's not because you have some just and innate ability. You had to work a little bit, you had to think, you had to interpret. And the first thing that we took away is that creativity is not just a talent.
Yeah, actually it takes a lot of energy of you, so it's a learning process, which is good. So this is what was not super new to us, but we had so many proofs of it. And this is what I, for instance, took personally with me back to my courses, so that you can teach it. It's not God-given, it's something you can train with a high consumption of energy.
Nice segue. You can keep the microphone.
Okay, I do. Yeah, I just said that.
The jump from recognizing that creativity is not just talent, that it takes energy and it takes effort, got us to a less easy discussion. We said, okay, well, we really took away this internal and external perspective. And Hye-Jung asked, internal and external perspective on what? We said creativity, of course. And then we quite quickly got into the same disagreement about appropriateness and usefulness and satisfaction that Anna says she's seen in so many other contexts. So the last thing that we took away was that we need to think about this internal and external perspective, think about how our students view creativity, how we view creativity, and which is the most appropriate in different contexts. So from this, to wrap things up for each of these 3 points, we'll have 3 takeaways about what we as educators think we can do with and for our students. And the first.
Yeah, I just mentioned that. We can understand it as a learning process, which is good, which takes out the nervous energy, which makes people cool down, hopefully, in the classes. That it is something that is not routine. We saw that picture in your great presentation with that snake doing these angles, and so it's like you have to force yourself, since the creative thinking processes consume so much of energy. So therefore, you need to train yourself to do the hard way, so to say, because at the end you will arrive at a better place, hopefully, at a more creative, better solution. We were discussing a lot about the next point, actually. The reflection and about the usefulness and the definition. And I'm happy to hand over back again to you what you want to add.
Yeah, I think if we have lively discussions about what creativity means, I think it's useful for us to reflect on what the value is for students. And we have a lot of tools as educators to help students reflect. They can reflect on what is creativity for them, what's useful for them, what's novel for them. And we can reflect on what value that adds to society. Is something just useful for you, or does it also solve a problem for the people around us? I think this room is a good example of a mixture of products that were designed maybe for the love of art, for the love of style, from an internal perspective, but that also satisfy some kind of need and desire, and in some cases solve unmet needs. So for us, we want to use these tools of reflection, whether it's group work, individual reflection, essays, critical evaluation of each other's work, in order to drum up a bit more interest, a bit more passion, and hopefully lead our students to a place where they can sort of utilize and implement this reflection to be more creative and to be better designers. So, that's us.
Thank you. Anna, is there anything you would like to add or ask the group?
Thank you for that. That was great. It just reminded me that the words we like to use, useful and so on, really depends on which field. So I think in the design field, the word that I see the most often is that works. It's working. And so I think when the definition is proposed, it's always proposed from one particular perspective. And why I went for satisfying is because if it works, that's why it's satisfying, because it works. It's satisfying because in this context, I'm looking for something relevant. It's satisfying because in this context, I want it to be meaningful. So it almost gets at a deeper sense of it hits you, and the why it's satisfying feels specific, actually. So I think in the design context, I think it fits well there. I'm not sure if useful does, because that puts a higher bar for students as well, whereas it's kind of working with what you already do with students, which is to say that works. And so I think that helps. And in terms of, you pointed out you reminded me of this wonderful book by Twyla Tharp, The Creative Habit. Again, I'm glad that you picked on the fact that it's a skill that it works on. It's a learning exercise. And we talked a little bit about Rick Rubin's work yesterday. The other thing I would recommend is Twyla Tharp's The Creative Habit, which is completely focused on why this is completely learnable. And the great case she picks there is of Mozart, the most talented person. And he himself said, everyone thinks this comes easily to me. It does not. I have worked harder than everyone else. And he writes this out, and it's all written out in this wonderful letter to his friend, that he was kind of annoyed that everyone thought this just like flew into him. But actually, he damaged himself working so hard at the pace he did to produce what he did and practice the way he did. So even in people who are super talented, I think we have to realize that this is a little bit annoying for them, perhaps, and that to really see it as a habit that people do is really the way to empower everybody. So thank you for that. That was great.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think there's so much in there also in dispelling many of the myths of design, right? Design has that big myth that there are people who are talented and people who are not, and people who got it and don't. And there's also, I think, a lot in there about assessment, right? And I'm still grading submissions from the past semester, and it really makes me think about, what does that mean to not just have my own judgment, but really think about students' progress, et cetera. So I think there's a lot for us to take away and reflect upon. So thank you so much for that. I'm excited to now invite Hye-Jung, where are you? Hye-Jung Eun, thank you so much for being here with us. Hye-Jung has a foot in two worlds. Right? On the one hand, she's an assistant professor at Neoma Business School in France. Right? And your research and teaching focuses on understanding how to manage creative talent. Right? I think that's something many of us can relate to, like what does it actually mean to not only practice as a creative, but how to manage that talent. Now, this other aspect of your life and practice gives you a lot of input for that, because Hye-Jung is also an independent producer for award-winning animated short films. She went to film school. Creativity is what serves as a common thread in weaving together those two experiences, so film production and management research. And with a deep passion for that intersection of arts and business, Hye-Jung leverages that expertise in both of those fields to connect creative talents as well as business professionals. Your research focuses on how individuals experience and navigate creativity-related challenges, often in the workplace. And with that, you look at the psychological and social dynamics of creativity in organizations. You're also working to develop case studies on managing creativity to then translate that into practice. You gave us some really, really interesting insight yesterday. And one of the things that you said was often consciously and unconsciously, we're not giving our ideas a chance to thrive. And I'm excited to have you share that wisdom with the rest of the group. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Is this on? Thank you all for being here. So I am Hye-Jung. I'm an assistant professor at Neoma Business School. So today I'm going to talk about psychological barriers that we may encounter when we try to translate our ideas into creative success. I think in earlier session we talked about we often look at individual characteristics, individual situations when we talk about creativity, but my talk is more about social processes. So we're going to talk about how if we want to go from having an amazing idea to go to this innovation, creative success, what we need to do, because I think we talked about this yesterday. These things, especially in business context, it doesn't happen individually. You often work with others. This is a collective work together. So you need to share this idea that you had with others in the team and others in organizations. You also need to build on this idea. You need to expand it. You need to refine it. You also have to support this idea with resources to implement it at the end to have innovation. So if you think about all these processes, these are social processes. So innovation happens in social context. It involves collaboration, communication, influences among individuals. So we're going to focus on this specific fact that people often self-censor their own ideas before they can further develop their ideas with others or on their own. So I'm going to ask you to focus on this phenomenon called self-censorship. So this is what we're going to talk about today. This is both conscious and unconscious process. Sometimes we do this knowingly, other times we do it and we're not even aware that we are censoring our own ideas. So for example, you are not willing to share your ideas with others in your team, or you would kill your raw ideas before you can develop it further to make it something amazing. So oftentimes we go for safer ideas at the end. So I want to highlight that we are often not giving our ideas a chance to thrive. Of course, there are many different reasons why we do this. And if you cannot really think of a situation, specific episodes where you are censoring your ideas, I would like to push yourself a bit to really think about 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or think about it in the perspective of your students. they may be censoring their ideas for various reasons. And in the interest of time, we'll just talk about 3 different mechanisms here. So maybe you have self-doubts about your creativity. The fact that you actually are all here actually tells me that you are a creative person, very likely. So let's think about in the context of education. Students might have self-doubts about their creativity. Then they will not be happy with their ideas. They also may like their ideas, but they may be afraid that they will get negative feedback from others. Or they may be under this pressure to have this perfect idea from the start. So I'm going to introduce you to 3 different topics from creativity research, and we're going to talk about these different psychological barriers. So creative self-efficacy, creativity anxiety, and creativity pressure. So the first topic is creative self-efficacy. So basically, if I ask you, are you creative? You will have certain answers. You might say, I'm the most creative person I know. You might say, I could work on my creativity. So if you ask your students, that will have these answers as well. These reflect their basically confidence in their creative abilities. This is creative self-efficacy. And research has shown that creative self-efficacy is a strong predictor for your creativity. So I think one of you briefly mentioned that creativity is not an innate ability, so you can develop this. You can definitely develop your creativity, and there are many different ways to develop your creativity. And one of the factors is creative self-efficacy. So if you are confident in your creativity, your creative ability also goes up. Researchers argue that creative self-efficacy serves as a strong motivator for your creativity. So how does lack of confidence in your creativity contribute to the situation where we censor our own ideas? Of course, because you're not confident in your creative abilities, you doubt your own ideas before you even share this with others to further develop it, so you're not willing to express them. And also because you are not confident, you basically avoid creative challenges. Then you're not giving yourself opportunities to have creative achievements. In turn, it will just reduce your creative confidence. So in context of design education, I was also thinking that some of you might not be in education. So I was thinking how to boost creative self-efficacy in school, in education, or in your organization. What you can try is that you can give them small creative wins. So basically, you give very small creative tasks. And then what you do is you celebrate all ideas, wild ones, very novel ones, and also not so novel ones. So you're celebrating all ideas with these creative, very small creative tasks. Then this will boost our students and our employees' creative confidence. Also, research shows that when others have confidence in our ability for creativity, our confidence also goes up. So as an instructor, as a manager, you can express freely your trust and confidence in your students' and employees' creativity. Something else that's very interesting is as an instructor, what you can do is that you can show them that you are also confident in your creativity. So your own creative self-efficacy also has a positive impact on students because you're setting a good role model for them. Something else you can also try is to give them creativity training. So researchers found that when students or employees are trained, when they learn about creativity more, so definition of creativity, what is creativity, what promotes creativity, what hinders creativity, give them different creative tasks and also give them different techniques to use for different creative tasks. This also boosts their confidence in their own creativity. So the second topic I want to talk about is creativity anxiety. This is this fear, discomfort, distress that you experience when you are working on creative tasks. Yesterday we talked about this, and then so you said that you're always, so some of you were mentioning that you're always anxious when you're working on creativity. I think this is because there is this embedded uncertainty in creativity and innovation. So for example, we don't have predefined results that we want to focus on. So it's more like an open-ended question that we need to work on. So from the start, we don't know where we are going. So there is this embedded uncertainty, and there's a lot of trial and error, a lot of failure, and etc. So whenever there's this requirement for you to be creative, there's a possibility that you will experience creativity anxiety. So how does this contribute to self-censorship? So because there is this fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of rejection, this also will lead to the situation where you don't want to share your idea, you will not develop this idea further. And so that's why even if your ideas are good, you might just hold back. And how can we reduce creativity anxiety in our students and our employees? Because the focus here is on the fear. What we can do is that we can reframe failure as a learning opportunity, and mistakes are part of creative processes. Something else, I think we talked a lot about this yesterday, about safe space. So this is psychological safety. What it means is that it's a place where you feel safe to share your own ideas, and it's okay to make mistakes. And something I try in my own classroom is from the very first class, I always explicitly say that there are no stupid ideas, there are no stupid questions, so feel free to say anything that you want to, and we're not here to judge each other. So it's very important as instructor to cultivate this environment where students actually feel really safe to share ideas. And this embedded uncertainty that I talked about comes from the fact that there are no single right answer. You can also reframe it to say that there are no wrong ideas as well. That's also another way to reduce anxiety and boost creative self-efficacy. So when students or employees have high confidence in their creativity, they're less likely to experience anxiety as well. Last topic I want to talk about is creativity pressure. This is this external pressure on you to produce creative results. We often hear innovate or die, especially in business context. This really reflects this pervasive pressure on employees to produce creative results. And how does this contribute to self-censorship? So basically, it comes with high expectations. It is evaluative in nature, and there is this need to produce results. So what happens is that you want to start from the start, you want to have this perfect idea that will work at the end. But oftentimes, if you think about it, your raw ideas are really rough. So if you focus too much on wanting to have this perfect idea from the start, you're likely to delay your creative efforts if it's not the case. How can we manage then this creativity pressure for our students and employees? Because there is this high expectations, we should balance this with more supportive environment. We should give them different resources that are needed. Also, we should give them constructive feedback. We should also focus on fostering collaboration, because this creativity pressure focus on evaluation, it highlights this comparison and competition. So as an instructor or a manager, what you can do is you should foster collaboration between individuals. So to summarize, if you don't have enough confidence in your creativity, if you experience anxiety, or if you're under creativity pressure, this might make you not want to share your idea with others. Of course, the end outcome is missed opportunities. And as I talk about these three different topics, I want us to pay attention to this growing research that shows us that there's this a certain social group that is suffering more from these different barriers, which leads us to talk about gender. So if I ask you who is more creative, you will have certain answers, right? So we don't have enough time, so I'll just move on. But researchers are also very interested, men and women, who are more creative. And researchers have found that there are no gender differences when it comes to actual creative abilities. So they have found repeatedly that men and women perform equally on different types of creativity tasks. But what's more important is that researchers also found that women are less expected to be creative. Women also receive less support for their creative activities. And women themselves are also less likely to put efforts in creative works. Another very interesting research I want to share with you is that when they found when people see an invention from a man, they attribute it to his genius. But when people see an invention from a woman, they attribute it to her hard work. So we see these gender differences not in actual creative abilities, but different aspects when it comes to creativity. So there's this growing research on gender and creativity. And why is this happening? And researchers also found that creativity is stereotypically associated with masculine attributes. So if you think about it, creativity is about daring, it's about challenging the status quo, it's about being adventurous. So all these things are masculine attributes rather than feminine attributes. So both men and women internalize this idea that creativity is a masculine activity, and that's why people see men as more creative. And will there be any gender differences for these three different topics that I talk about for self-censorship? And research actually find that compared to men, women have less confidence in their own creativity. So women tend to think that they are not creative, and they have higher level of creativity anxiety. So they have more fear for creative works. And they also have more negative impression of creativity pressure in workplace. Another research I want to share with you shows that, so these researchers asked men and women to generate different ideas, multiple ideas. And when it comes to actual creativity of these ideas, they didn't find any differences. But when, the gender difference actually emerges when they select one idea. So researchers asked them to select only one idea out of multiple ideas to implement, and they found that women chose less novel idea. I think this is highly relevant to what we're talking about. Maybe there's fear of judgment, fear of failure that is more salient for women in this research. So I just want to briefly summarize. If your students don't have confidence in their own creativity, if they have high level of anxiety when they're working on it, or if they are under pressure for creative results, these may not be on the surface. We may not even see it because that's why these are hidden barriers, hidden psychological barriers. Then these will basically make them censor their own ideas. And it is possible that women, female students in your classrooms are experiencing suffering more from these barriers. So next time, if you are about to throw this new idea into a trash can, I hope you can ask yourself, am I giving it up too soon? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hye-Jung. So what do we do about this? I'd love to hear from the learning community. Who's the group that worked on this? There you are.
I'm Michael Hole, hello. For us, it really emerged very quickly. What we felt most strongly about was really how can we prepare our students, our female students, for this gender design gap, so to speak, in the workplace. And we had a lot of discussions and examples. I'm glad we had some examples again just now. For example, I learned that when in job interviews, when a woman presents really confident, it's perceived as kind of being bullyish, yeah? And when a man presents just as confident, he's perceived as competent, and people are sympathetic with it, yeah? They accept it. So there are all these, what was it called, hidden barriers to creative success that we are surrounded by. And how can we prepare our students for this world, we thought? So, and I think the first step was we have to create an awareness with our students that there are gender roles in this creative practice. Because it's hidden to us, it's invisible, and how can we? So implicitly, students live in this world, but we've never probably made it really explicit. And I think all of you had really interesting examples for that. Then in the first real step, we say we have to discuss this, and that it has to do with language, yeah. And through using language, we kind of create and make and share reality with each other. And so we have to create, as a first step, with our students, this awareness of the language and how we are using language. And I think we always mentioned the point at the university, the art and design universities, the classes are small, everything is cozy and cuddly, and it's a kind of a woolen environment, yeah, that we are in. And suddenly, when they leave this woolen environment, suddenly comes the cold shower of the real world and the workplace. So we have to create an awareness of these gender roles at the workplace and the difference to how we use it in class, how we use these roles in class. Then, second, share workplace experiences. So this is, I think, very vivid. Get into a discussion, and some of the female students, and when one starts talking, or even the male students, when one starts sharing their experiences, where they encountered this kind of gender discrimination. Yeah. So when I told an example that my PhD students tell me that they are sitting around a table and they come up with an idea in a group discussion and no one reacts, and then suddenly a male colleague 3 minutes later repeats their idea, and suddenly everyone is silent and says, "Oh, brilliant!" Yeah. And everyone here had encountered this example as well. Yeah. So this is the real world. So the next idea we had was getting from raising awareness and discussions to actually doing something. What can we do? And the idea was we could initiate a role play, yeah, where people take on roles, and we made these role-playing cards. And they are. Yes, go ahead.
So we introduce our roles ourselves. Sorry, I'm the shy one. I'm almost invisible, and this is how I feel best, basically. And so I stand behind you, maybe slightly, and and we thought this is good to if you actually change rules. So we have cards, and by accident they get the card, and you have to get into this role, and then you have to try to play it best. I'm here beside you, and yes, and then you find out maybe, and then you're probably able to reflect your own position, your own role, and stereotypes, of course. So to foster, to get rid of stereotypes, and that will maybe help to get more equal to creative ideas.
Much more important, I'm the boss. My name is Ingmar, and I'm the boss. And I just like to mention one thing. Now I'm look very male-ish. I'm male, but in our role play, maybe I'm a female boss or a diverse boss as well. But most important, I'm the boss.
Yeah, I'm the bystander, and I'm observing the situation. I recognize bad things, but I keep silent and don't say anything. So, and don't support anyone. So, not a nice role, but I learn a lot.
I'm Barbie. I'm the girly. I'm always smiling. I love everyone. I love also Ken, and Ken loves me, but I have no attitude.
Okay. Nice. So these are some of the possible roles and more. You can make them up, yeah, as you go. I had suggested let the students mirror the professors, yeah, and the others have to guess who they are. But try it out, yeah. So then we had what we heard earlier: reward bravery, courage, and yeah. So this helps people to grow and discover their self and increase their self-efficacy. So we heard this a couple of times. So reward bravery and courage. Then we had also, with role-playing cards, was the reverse and accelerate. Reverse was, again, what? Remember?
Reverse means that we actually take these rules to an extreme. How can we make the situation even worse?
Thanks, and exaggerate, yes, so you learn, because you can learn from that as well. And then we have, finally, that was a suggestion, have a kind of written self-evaluation, answering a couple of questions, for example, in which the students or the learners can reflect their experience, what they took from this, and then perhaps also get feedback. So, and then we had a little bit a contentious discussion after that, which was about should this process be documented or not? How would it be documented? When you do all these embarrassing role plays, there's a camera running, how does that work? Yeah. So, documentation, question mark. There was a suggestion to maybe do a graphic novel about it, about these sketches and experiences and situations. Or an animation, creative writing. And in our discussion, it really emerged that this can be totally useful. And now you can say something, Michaela.
In my opinion, it's very important to take the matter outside, not to stay in the safeness of the classroom. And I did this at the University of Stuttgart. It was a diversity project about mobbing, and it's not about confronting the Opfer. It's you can take the matter outside in various technique of graphic design, for example, doing an animation, and there are birds who are the victims. So you don't have to concentrate on the victims, but you can tell stories about it. And this was my opinion. It's necessary to take the matter outside, but in another medium. Yes.
Thanks. And I think this is what we gathered together. These are the steps that we think our students could benefit from preparing for the gender roles at the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you so much for you sharing your reflections and ideas. Hye-Jung, is there any thoughts that you might want to share?
Yeah, I just want to mention that I really love that you start with awareness. I think it's very important. I think students themselves are also not even aware that whether they are under pressure or whether they're having anxiety, unless you really push them to really think about these processes as well. So I really love that you start with awareness, and I love the role play. I was just curious, would you change your roles as well? So, like when you are like a Barbie, would you become, right? So that, I think that will really work well for our students to really put themselves in different shoes, to really think about different processes. So I really, really appreciate this. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, there's something about the playfulness, right, that lets us approach topics that actually can be quite heavy, right, in a way where we begin to raise that awareness, but might not get totally lost in that heaviness, which I think is a perfect segue, Sandy, to the conversation that you're going to lead us in. I'm so excited that you're here. Sandy Speicher has been driven essentially by one goal throughout her career as a designer and design leader, which is to create meaningful systems change. Sandy is the former CEO of the global design firm IDEO, which many of you might know. She led IDEO through the most difficult time of the pandemic and many other challenging times. Well beyond that, in your long tenure at the company, your work has really redefined industries, right? You've transformed how people learn, how people work, how people live. And you've worked on some of the world's toughest challenges, no kidding. You've reimagined national education systems. I've had the privilege of spending about a decade doing that together, so we know each other quite well. You've reimagined workplaces, you've reimagined how we can be together in society, and then made that tangible in the solutions that have actually come out of that work. What that has done is create a focus on driving progress, right? Progress for people, for organizations, and for society. And that is really exemplified through a lot of the results that now live out in the world globally. Sandy has also taught at Stanford University, at Washington University, and also at a bunch of elementary schools, I think. And her ideas have been shared in numerous publications. I recommend looking at some of those articles, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Fortune, Harvard Business Review, and others. And your ideas have been present at global convenings such as the Aspen Ideas Festival, the Clinton Global Initiative, the United Nations, or the World Economic Forum. So we're very honored that you have joined us here today. You partner with global leaders, businesses, philanthropists, who aspire to drive bold leaps, right, and make progress in their communities and countries. And when we had dinner last night, part of our conversation was that what we're talking about here with that topic of creativity is actually quite different from how we might have talked about this 10 years ago. Had we had this convening 10 years ago, we might have talked about creativity techniques and kind of like colorful things we could do, right? It might have been this really bright, colorful and happy thing. And here we are talking about anxiety, talking about barriers, about gender differences. That's the time we live in, right? We live in an incredibly complex world, and we have to have that conversation about what that means for creativity. But we also have to look beyond that, right? We have to reclaim our imagination. So I'm excited you're going to share some of your thoughts on that. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for that intro, Annette. And thank you for having me here. This has been a really fun event. I have really enjoyed all of the inspiration, and I hope that today you find some takeaways that you can bring into your classrooms, your workplace, or your own personal practice. So as Annette mentioned, today I wanted to talk about the imagination, but not in the way that we might have a few years ago, where we're really trying to foster the creative capabilities. Today I'm interested in looking at what's getting in the way of access to our imagination. And I've said here, how to stay creative in the face of complexity, anxiety, and overwhelm. So I want to start just by asking you to close your eyes for a minute. Just take a breath. We've been talking for quite a few hours right now. And I want to just ask you to reflect on a question. Please raise your hand if you feel that in the last year, you felt some kind of stress, anxiety, or overwhelm, either in your work or your life. Okay, thank you. And then keep your hand up if that feeling interfered with your ability to create. Yeah. Most of the hands still up, but some went down. Cool, okay, thank you. You can put your hands down and you can open your eyes again. As Annette mentioned, that I spent almost 2 decades at the design innovation firm IDEO. I went from many different roles. I started as an intern and ended as CEO, so I have a lot of angles of experience in the creative process and setting up a creative organization. For those of you that don't know, IDEO is a kind of creative powerhouse. A lot of organizations come to IDEO to help imagine new solutions, workplace behaviors, even answer some of these complex systems questions that we're talking about in this event. And IDEO is very well published on codifying the practices of design and creativity. So how we bring ideas out, how we set up our workplaces. There's many, many books and toolkits, et cetera, that IDEO has published. And as I mentioned already, I'm not going to go into any of that. So if you were hoping for that from the person representing practice at this event, sorry. Because the kinds of things that I always worked on at IDEO, we had a whole bunch of different dynamics at play. So I started in our organizational transformation practice, and as Annette mentioned, built our education practice. And these areas of work were quite hard. We were always working on, that's Annette, by the way. Every photo I have of project spaces has Annette in them. But we were always working on really hard questions, and other teams would walk by our spaces and they would be like, "Oh, that's cool that you're working on that, but I'm kind of glad I'm not because I've got some fun happening over here." We were never really seen as we were the nerds. We were the nerds of the company. And I don't know if you, because the screen's a little small, if you noticed every single person's expression in this photo. I'm going to zoom in so you can see that. That's what we looked like all the time. No, I will say we did also have fun, but we figured out how to have fun in a different way. Fun amongst all of these difficult questions and all of these like complex things, because we were working on systemic questions, right? Anything that you work on in education, we're designing learning tools, global platforms, we're designing schools and school systems. All of these things required us to understand a whole field, but also understand an enormous number of needs across many different stakeholders. And almost always, it was impossible to reconcile all of the different needs into one experience that would work for everybody. So we're always in a degree of inquiry, a degree of nervousness and worry that how do we put all of this together? Do we know enough? So I'm going to give you an example of that. I'm not going to talk too much about this project, but I'm just going to set up the context. This is about 10 years ago now. We had a group of organizations approach us because new research had come out that showed that the brain takes longer to develop than previously thought. So when they classified adolescence, the phase of adolescence, the thought was that adolescent development ends at about 18. So anybody who had committed a crime after the age of 18 was considered an adult, tried as an adult, and also then punished as an adult. And so they had found that actually the brain isn't quite in full form until about the age of 25, especially in young men. And what that meant was like the risk centers of the brain hadn't really been formed. Maybe decision-making wasn't like, I don't know, as I'm looking at Anna, Anna can explain this really well. But what that meant was there was this window of opportunity to rethink the design of prisons for young men, especially between the ages of 18 and 25, because there was a developmental opportunity that wasn't previously understood. So this group of organizations approached us and said, can we redesign prisons? And can we make a proposal to the state that shows what that design could look like? And of course, we were very excited to work on this. People are really interested in working on these meaningful questions. We understood this would be complex. We understood this would not be easy. We assembled a team, a very thoughtful team to be sensitive to the complexities of this work. And this team did the first thing that we do in a human-centered design process. They went into prisons to understand the lives and the needs of young men. And they came back to the office just overwhelmed by the experience. There were so many dynamics at play, so I don't want to unpack this, but maybe you can imagine what it might feel like to be sitting with someone that maybe you didn't have a shared life experience with. maybe feelings of guilt came up, or questions of their own lives, or questions of their own context, questions of how am I actually going to create any meaningful difference? There were so many questions the team came back with that they felt immediately stuck and kind of incapacitated to move forward with the design question. Now, I want to let you know that the team really worked through that and did beautiful and meaningful work that was quite resonant. And yet, I still look back on this experience and say, how did we get through that, knowing that that feeling had taken over and made it very hard for the team to design? And I will say over the last 15 years, again and again and again, I saw that same dynamic rising there. Every team in some time in a creative process would get to this point of like, I'm stuck, I don't know how to move forward. And for different teams, it might happen in different parts of a process, but the overwhelm, the stress, the anxiety was there, and it was making it really hard for people to design. So why is it important to understand what was happening? Well, we have to work with these dynamics. We have to figure out how to get access to our imagination even when we're flooded with all of that stress or anxiety. There are a ton of challenges that we have in the world today, and we as designers want to participate in that. How do we make a better world? We've got things like poverty alleviation, climate change, creating inclusive societies, the challenges of migration, artificial intelligence. There are so many challenges today that need new answers. And as designers, we want to participate in that. We also, as individuals and as a society, are very aware now of the systemic nature of everything. It's very hard to talk to anybody these days without getting to very quickly, oh, and the whole system is messed up, right? We have systems consciousness in a way that I think we didn't before. And what happens when you're conscious of the system is you start to get lost in yourself. How can you actually make a difference when the system is so big? Plus, we have constant access to a feed of anxiety-producing material, right? The sensation of news today, we have a 5-minute break between things and we're immediately checking, right? We're constantly putting ourselves into a kind of overstimulus of realizing all of the complexity and stress that's happening in the world today. So just for a minute, I want to ask, what do you think all of that does to your nervous system? Yeah, it sends it into high alert, right? That our really inbuilt core skill of survival kicks in, and whatever mechanism whatever word that starts with F that we respond with is going to happen. You're going to go into fight, flight, freeze, flop, or fawn. There's now like a nice number of them, not just fight or flight. Do you know what it doesn't do for us? It does not help us imagine a better world. When we're in that nervous system response, all kinds of things happen and essentially takes us down into a tunnel vision view where what we're focused on is our survival, not the possibilities. So it's exactly because of all of these dynamics that we need to figure out how to regain access to our imagination, because the future desperately needs us to be creating new solutions. So I just want to say, share with you what my mental picture of imagination is when I use the phrase. To me, it's like imagination is this flowing river. It is this capability we have inside of us that it just goes. It goes. We're making sense of the world all the time, putting together new understandings. That is all the kind of ever-present flow of our imagination. But if the weather is stormy, we're not going to be able to see that flowing river or access that flowing river. And so the question is, how do we pull the clouds away? Or how do we help ourselves see what's flowing even when the weather is stormy? So how can we reclaim our imagination in the face of constant complexity, anxiety, and overwhelm? I'm going to share 3 common responses that, that tend to block our imagination, and advice for how to navigate that. What do we do when those things happen? Or maybe even how do we think about design a little bit differently so that we're less likely to cause some of those triggers? And to be clear, this is like an initial framework. I'm sure in your own life you can think about experiences that you might have had that don't fit to this framework. That's great. Let's keep building this out so that we have more and more agency. The first one, though, I want to talk about is empathy overwhelm. And that's the situation that happened with the team that I mentioned. This is where the weight of our empathy, maybe turning into guilt or recognition of our own privilege, becomes all-consuming. And it makes it difficult to engage in creative questions as those emotions take over. Now, there's a lot that's happening in the brain and also happening in the mind. I'm not going to go into that for the sake of time today. But we are essentially using all of our capabilities to really try to deeply understand, and yet that's putting us into this trigger state that makes it then hard for us to even process what we're experiencing. So underneath all of those dynamics, there's really one major question that's happening when you're in a kind of empathy overwhelm. This question takes over in your mind to say, who am I to solve this giant problem? Anybody feel that? Or you don't have to raise your hand. Actually, it's a little awkward to ask for that. But ask yourself if you've ever felt that state where you feel the problem is so much bigger than you are. It makes it hard to engage. So what can we do about it? How can we navigate it? This is a real dynamic we're going to face again and again, especially given the kinds of questions that we have to be working on. Well, the first thing I would offer is that there's something in the framing of the design process about empathy that's actually that's making it more likely for this to happen. That when we think of it like empathy, we think of it like we're the ones that have to do the work, and that is my subject. I'm going to learn about their lives, and I'm going to go back to my room, my office, and I'm going to imagine for them. Well, what we found doing this work that I mentioned was that what we had to do was build a respectful, collaborative relationship so that we didn't feel extractive of people that we felt we were trying to be part of helping. And so what we had to shift was that these are not research subjects, these are our collaborators. And so the team often went back to the prisons, not just to interview people and learn about their lives, but to co-create and say, what would a better future be like for you? Let's design that together. The team even went back before we shared the final proposal with the client team and shared it with the men that they had worked with to make sure they felt properly represented. It's a very deeply respectful relationship where it's collaborative, not one that feels extractive. Another thing I'll kind of add in there, that same idea, was recognizing the power that we do have, accepting the privileged position that we're in, and using that power and privilege to give voice to people who couldn't be in the room. The team in their final meeting in this work brought the voice of the men into the room, and people who had been working in the prison system for like 30 years said to us, I never understood as well as you had shared with me what is going on for the people that I've been working with. So you as a designer have great power to bring the voice into the room and help more and more people understand what's happening in everybody's lives. So there's a lot you can do here. I'm sure there's more. I'm sure we could do side brainstorms. That would be very fun, but we don't have time for that today. I want to keep moving, though, into some of these other dynamics that are happening. Cognitive overload, that feels like an easy one. Do you guys feel that on a daily basis these days? Yes, because we are being pummeled with information these days. But you might find in a design process that the deeper that you dive into a problem, the more complex it becomes. It doesn't get simpler. It gets more and more complex. There's more things to keep learning about. And this starts to create this feeling of an endless cycle of learning that you can't actually move forward because you have to know more. Again, lots happening in the brain and stuff happening in the mind. There are things like your working memory is super overloaded, so you actually can't process the information in front of you, but that puts you into a state of lack of confidence, for instance. So there are certain dynamics that aren't you, they are what's happening to you. underneath all of this is just somewhere in you, it's screaming, I just can't process all of this. So what can we do about that as designers? First, it's okay, I think, and maybe this is something really underscoring to the students that you're working with, that you don't have to be the one to originate everything. I find a lot of young designers today, they don't want to read expert research. They don't want to read what's become before. But people have spent their whole careers understanding the space that you're working. And it's a real gift to build on that research, leverage that research, and incorporate that into the work that you're doing. So how do we help young designers know that it's great to leverage experts and even partner with them as we're designing? Visualizing the system is a great tool when you feel like everything's too overwhelming, making it visible, mapping the relationships, mapping the components of a system. And one of my favorite hacks is the kind of just don't look at your board of research, don't look at your notebook, don't look. And just, if I say to you, you got to present tomorrow, what are you going to say? Let your intuition pull out some of that synthesis, because your mind kind of can't quite access it when you're in this state, but your intuition has it. So there's a lot we can do in the process of synthesis when we get a little overwhelmed by all the information. Last I want to talk about is ambiguity. Ambiguity, I actually love it. Confession here, I really love that feeling of like, I don't know, but you know what? Because, my feeling is always that in that state of, I don't know what is going to be, like we know something new is going to come out, but you can really max out on that state. You can get paralyzed by that state of, I don't know. So when there's no clear right answer and every choice carries uncertainty, the fear of unintended consequences makes it feel too risky to move forward on anything. And so we get stuck in the ambiguity. Again, a bunch happening in the brain and the mind, but I'll tell you that underneath it, it's like, I just don't know what's going to work. And that feeling becomes the predominant feeling in your mind. So what can we do about that? Design has amazing methods for this already with prototyping. There's like, let's just make a sketch. Let's just make a prototype. We saw examples of that today. Like, let's just keep moving in a small way. And that step will help us learn. That's great. We can go super far to bring some of these things you've talked about into the classroom. We can put things into the wild, right, out in the real world, get responses. That is, design, I think, knows that quite well. But part of what we struggle with, I think, as designers overall is we're kind of looking for perfection on the idea. I remember being in the CEO role right when the pandemic happened, and we had to shut down offices. And there was literally no playbook, right, for what was happening. I had never been through a global pandemic before, had you all? And so there was just so much ambiguity. Every solution you thought of, it was like, oh my God, what is this gonna become? And so what we did in that case was we moved from this model of having to get it right to just having to keep moving. So instead of thinking of perfection, let's just get to progress. And we time bound, like we put out new policies, but we said there's going to be an expiration date on this, so we have permission to keep evolving as we have more information. Another method that I love is this idea of two-track thinking. So if you are struggling with the overwhelm of ambiguity, I think many of you probably know the term speculative design, where you sort of, let's go to the far future, where we don't have to worry about a lot of the realities of today. Speculative design is an amazing tool to help us through ambiguity, but it can also leave us feeling that we've just dreamed without reality. And so if we only think what can happen today, which is also a great tool, we'll also feel small. We didn't get to the future. So how do we do both at the same time? Actually just give ourselves permission to think about today, to think about the far future, and then as we look at those two realms, how do we build bridges between the two? And that's where we're going to start to get to some of those novel futures, but in a really tactical way. So you can see there are many ways that today's challenges can configure us to struggle a bit to move through a design process, but there are also many things that we can do to navigate those realities. And just one disclaimer that I didn't put into these slides today is if you're in these states, or your team is, or your students are, the first thing is calm the nervous system. forcing yourself to keep going, even with any of these methods, won't work. You actually have to like breathe, step away, take a break, organize, clean your space, like sort through things. Depending on what state you're in, different things will work, but you do have to kind of get yourself back to a state where you can engage in this. And becoming conscious of that, especially in a team dynamic, is really important. All right, I have one more thing I wanted to end with here. There is something consistent, I don't know if you've noticed it, something consistent across all of these blockers to our imagination. And it's this idea that the social psychologist Paul Slovic calls pseudo-inefficacy. It is the awful feeling that the problem is just too big and we are just too small. And that state starts to shut us down. And it's because that we are wired to want to feel our own agency. We want to feel we can make a difference in the world. And when we are faced with these voices that tell us this problem is too big, who am I to solve it? I can't really understand it all. Like those voices are telling us that we are going to be ineffective. Now, I love this is called pseudo-inefficacy because we're actually not ineffective, but we feel we are, right? So it's a perception. And if you find yourself in that state, so if there's any triggers happening, there's two immediate remedies that I hope are the things that you take away from this. Curiosity and community. So the first point on curiosity, did you know that judgment and curiosity can't coexist in your mind at the same time? So if you're in a state of judgment, either about somebody else or yourself, which you can see a lot of this is about self-judgment, one of the remedies out of it is to find something you are authentically curious about and just ask that question. That state of curiosity moves us out of judgment and into inquiry that can bring us into our creativity. So find a question you're generally curious about and start there. And then the point on community. These problems that we're working on are bigger than any of us. And yet we are sort of conditioned to believe that it's our job to fix it all. That's why people feel climate anxiety. That's why people are shutting down in the face of all the news that's happening today. That we have this pressure on ourselves or this belief that we have to be the ones to fix it. But it is bigger than any one of us. And so what we have to do is find the other people that are pursuing these questions also and recognize we are part of a group. And you can think of it like a choir. That if there's a choir, you're part of a choir and everyone's singing, but you need to take a breath, when you pause to take that breath, everyone else can keep the song going. And then when you've taken that breath, you are now stronger for when someone else needs to take a breath and you can keep singing that song. So if you find yourself in this state feeling ineffective, find somebody else. Turn to a friend, turn to a collaborator, find somebody else who's pursuing a similar question and regain your clarity, maybe even make something together and help kind of find your agency and your confidence again. All right, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Sandy, thank you. And finally, I would like to invite 2 or more people from our learning community to share what stuck with you and what this might have sparked for your work.
Hello, everybody. I shortly introduce our team, which is, we start with the only man in our group, John. Then we have Stephanie, we have Lou, we have Jenny, Birgitta, Andrea, Angelica, and me, Birte. And hand over to John to start.
All right. Hello. Okay. Sandy. Thank you so much for the impulses. It was very insightful. We want to kind of like to use this occasion and this opportunity to kind of recap what we have found. And we had a chance to contemplate in the group and to kind of reflect upon what you have shared with us just now. So we thought about the title "Creativity Needs Democracy." Yeah, so that is not politically mentioned, but we wanted to kind of cherish and to embrace the values of democracy, yeah, which is like freedom of speech, justice, participation, accountability, respect, tolerance for unknown. Yeah, so we wanted to highlight this as one of our, let's say, our working title, and then we have kind of wrap up the things that are limiting our ability to create and how to break free. I think that was one of the core, let's say, sentences that you have addressed. And then we have thought about, we have become actually monsters during our contemplation. And so this is a kind of reflection of who we are. So basically, or all the different, let's say, problems that we are encountering within this process. Can you see that? Yeah, yeah. And yeah, we're talking about really wicked problems. We're talking about not really tangible things. Yeah, anxiety, distress really causes a lot of, let's say, intangible things, and we don't really know where to start, yeah, and where to end. So we have really like anxiety, complexity, loneliness, but also the fear to express yourself. Huh?
Why we like this image quite a lot is because it's a lot about feelings. And it's a little bit diffuse, and so we thought it's really a big, huge thing, which it feels heavy, maybe even. We have wicked problems. We have where to start, because it's too much. It's all at once, and also not tangible at all. And you see even that there's some dirt on it, which happened somehow. I would say like it's intentionally, because it feels like this. And then we thought maybe we do a next step. And immediately we came to it's about doing. Let's do something. Come into practice to start a process, and which means actually basically from description, which is kind of not really tangible as well, to action. And for this action, we need to size things down. And it looks a little bit similar, but the difference is it's all little small things, which we showed with little spheres or dots. And there you're able to get hands-on, because this is tangible and this is somehow here you're able to do. And it's all single parts, but they are somehow connected to each other. Put this down. In the middle there is awareness for us. So there's a lot of caring. There's listening. There's looking. So you are really present. And also when it comes to education, I think this is an important part, that you're really there. Like when you described the project with the prisoners, like being somehow also flexible and listening to them and seeing like we have to change something. Here as well we took single parts out of what we took away from your speech, which is take a pause, for example. Don't take it personal. We have take on but not in. Embrace the imperfection. We have useful tools and techniques you need for everything actually, and you can develop them somehow by yourselves according to your needs. We have seek for collaborative power. Trigger reflection. Build communities, also ask for help. Don't be shy to ask for help. The challenges of individual attitudes, and everything somehow leads to small focus on small topics. And describe them precisely. And this leads to the next and last step.
Okay, it's very simple. So I just put 2 of these and the... Which was it? Okay, because now we do a little hack. And for those who were here yesterday, we saw a little black hole. And yeah, as we said, it's about break it down to a human scale, whatever human scale for you is. And yeah, it's really important to focus on small topic to create the bigger picture. And you can take, and be really precise. And for example, we put the embrace the imperfection to put it in the middle and work with this. And then you can go a step backward, put the next one, and finally you get the whole picture. Maybe this is one opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Sandy, any thoughts you might want to share to close? Yes, please.
I just want to say thank you. It's fun to see. Oh, yeah, you can hear me. It's fun to see what you've taken away, and also thank you for making it visual. That always helps. I love the focus on doing. I think that's right on, and it also blends with what Anna shared with us, that creativity is really about doing. And the way that you brought the kind of core points at the end makes me think that one of the things that we can do as educators is help people who are early in their career know what designers are even working on today, but also not just focusing on the bigness of the problems, but focusing on the contribution the designer makes, what role we play within the bigness of the problem, so that from the beginning we're talking about we contribute, we don't take, nobody takes the whole thing on. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you to our guests. Thank you to our learning community for spending this time with us. I hope there was something in there for you to take away. It was a breadth of different experiences, ideas, and inspiration, I would say. So I hope that there's something that you can take away. This does close a 3-year journey. Thank you to the learning community that is taking this back into your classrooms. There is one final step, which René will tell you about in a moment. But for now, I just want to close with lots of gratitude also to our speakers who traveled here from faraway places to be with us. Thank you so much for doing that.
I would like to continue by thanking the gracious host who lets us be in this inspiring and spectacular space. Thank you, Angelika Nollert.
Yeah, I have also to say a very, very big thank you. Thanks to Annette, thanks to René, thanks to the others like Christoph and Markus, who is not there today couldn't make it. Thanks to the speakers, thanks to all the participants. And I'm really touched because I have to say goodbye now in a way, but only for today, because we will see us together. I think what we learned is it was a lot. It was inspiring, it was joyful as well. We played a lot, there was fun, but it was also serious. And I think we, as we said all the time from the very beginning, we are a growing learning community, and I would say we are definitely a growing creative community. And it's not the start of being creative, but we can enrich all these abilities. And I think that we learned and that we trust in. And probably René will also tell us what is next in November. And therefore I say goodbye only until November. And I very much hope, and I'm also pretty sure, that we stay in contact. We exchanged already here in this session, but it is the 6th session, and unbelievable in a way. So time was running, and now we know also to breathe. So we have a long breeze and look very much forward to the future. And thank you so very much. It was really great. Thanks for the cooperation, and it's not finished, luckily.
Thank you, Angelika.
Last but not least, I would like to thank the behind-the-scenes team that makes all this run so smoothly. First and foremost, Steven Stannard, who prepared everything, all the materials. We had in the last 3 days special support by Anke. Thank you, Hannes, Bastian, the film and media team who made sure to capture what was happening here. Thank you, Aaron, for documenting the photos. And thank you to the team with the audio material. To that end, I would like to invite you to visit our website where you can view all the videos from the events earlier. So if you are curious about learning sciences, personal growth, artificial intelligence, value-based leadership for sustainability and innovation, it's all there. Please save the date. On November the 20th this year, we will present two book publications on the insights and experience of the whole 3 years program, and next year there will be a third one on learning sciences.
Yeah, and if for some reason you haven't had enough yet, you are most welcome to join us tomorrow. We have the privilege of hosting Sandy Speicher as well as Kim Dabbs, who's an amazing author, both of them incredible, inspiring women and design leaders, for a conversation about what design can do in our world today. It's right across the street from here at TUM. If you want the information, we're going to leave this up. You can scan the QR code. Would love to see some of you there tomorrow night at 5. There will also be drinks and community afterwards if you want to hang out. You're welcome to stay with us for a little longer today. I encourage you to talk to each other because you're fabulous people. And otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow or in November. Thank you so much.